So let's start by setting our motivation. So thinking about different kind of difficulties that we face, we're actually not always able to handle them and overcome all of our difficulties. And so this is the basis of going for refuge, is recognizing that we need help, having a fear of situations that we can't handle. And as Buddhists, we try to understand that actually what the situation we're trying to seek relief from are actually internal. And so we have these internal enemies, states of mind that don't work, and sometimes that we can't really control. So I think everybody's pretty much familiar with that. But seeing that for what it is quite helpful. And as we study the Buddhist teachings and come to understand them better, we can learn to work with these and actually see that it's possible to be free from these states of mind. So the various sufferings we have are shared by all beings. And just as we want to be happy, so do all other beings. And so let's just take our time, do what we can do in this life in order to progress along this path so that we can be of the most benefit to all beings. And tonight we'll do that by looking at the path to enlightenment. Venerable Children has asked us to go over the different levels of motivation and also the three principal aspects of the path and how they relate in this path. It starts from where we are now, going all the way to enlightenment. So it's kind of a daunting, not really daunting, but a lot of material, let's put it that way. So for people who have this blue Pearl of Wisdom book at home, you might be helped by looking at page 90 through 93, because it has an outline of the gradual path to enlightenment. And we'll be going over some of those parts. And so when Venerable introduced the three principal aspects of the path, she told a story about these two Tibetan practitioners, so I'm thinking we're probably Kadampa. And one was Geshe Kunchanga, and he asked his disciple Geshe Chengawa, would you rather be a master of the 5 sciences, have perfect single-pointed concentration and clairvoyance, or would you rather be a person who hasn't yet realized Lama Atisha's teachings, but has firm recognition of their truth? So he's kind of like, do you want to be like, have all this status and, it's really well thought of to have all these kind of understandings of, like having 5 PhDs and clairvoyance and single-pointed concentration. Sounds pretty good. But the response that Geshe Chengawa said was, no, I'd rather be the person who has firm recognition of the truth of the Buddha's teachings. And so why would that be that he would say that when he could have had single-pointed concentration and all these other abilities, and then not even have realizations of the path, but just have some recognition of their truth? And so then, in explaining this, Venerable Children said that, well, if you had, when you die, all that knowledge you had of the various sciences is going to disappear. And if you had clairvoyant powers, but you really didn't have, a good heart, you could use it in very destructive ways. And with single-pointed concentration, well, you know, or clairvoyant power, and you know, and things like that, that alone isn't going to free you. So really, what's more important is to understand the path and have some conviction in it, so that you carry that with you as you go from life to life. Because these other things don't really have a lasting impact on the mind. Whereas when we, even if we haven't got realizations, but we're studying and trying to understand the gradual path, we're actually planting these seeds that we're going to take with us. And so eventually we will develop realizations, and eventually this will lead us to liberation and enlightenment. So looked at it in that way, that's actually the better road to take, but not one that is maybe intuitively obvious unless we have an understanding of the path. And so when he answered and he said, who hasn't realized Lama Tisha's teachings, what they're referring to there really are the gradual path to enlightenment, the various teachings, but especially the three principal aspects of the path. And these aspects of the path are renunciation, or this determination to be free, and bodhicitta, which is this altruistic intention to become enlightened so that we can benefit all beings, and then the correct view that understands emptiness. So those are the three principal aspects: renunciation, bodhicitta, and the wisdom of the correct view. And so as we go through this, the path to full enlightenment, we're going to try to touch on the verses from the three principal aspects of the path. But we want to do this in terms of motivation. And actually all of these three aspects of the path help us to purify our motivation. And so our motivation we want to look at first, because it's the chief determining factor for the value of anything and everything that we do. It's not actually the action or even how it looks. It's actually our motivation that is the most important. And so even when we're sitting here listening to the teachings, our motivation, if we just have a motivation to be able to impress other people with the words that we've learned tonight, I mean, that's pretty worldly, But if we can try to generate any understanding and some motivation for renunciation, for bodhicitta, or for wisdom, those kind of things, anytime we try to work on those, any action we do will be very beneficial for us, because those are a kind of motivation that's going to lead to both our happiness, but also eventually to our enlightenment. So this is about the power of motivation. And so with renunciation, that is a motivating factor. It helps us to set our priorities in life and gives our life a lot of meaning and purpose. We're kind of going beyond I, me, mine, and my happiness now kind of mentality. And with bodhicitta, we're enhancing this motivation even more. And the power of that motivation is just amazing. Anything we do with that motivation will stay with us until we're fully enlightened. It can never wane. Whereas all of our other virtues, like Shantideva says, will wax and wane like a plantain tree, or they'll wane like a plantain tree, because they're impermanent, they're going to extinguish. But with the motivation that goes all the way to full enlightenment, you're going to have that carrying with you all the way. So that's incredibly powerful. And then with having the correct view, this wisdom, then instead of seeing everything as so solid, so inherently existent, we'll be able to see things more like an illusion, and our mind will be much freer. We won't get so attached, we won't get so angry, and we won't be so reactive. And that kind of wisdom will help us to have the courage, even if we don't have it fully developed, but as we're progressing along and understanding it, gives the courage to even do the bodhisattva path. So this is the wisdom that cuts cyclic existence. So that's why he answered the way he did. So then when we look at the Lam Rim as a set of teachings, they are very beneficial in many ways. And one is that they help us to see the intention of everything that the Buddha taught. It can be very confusing when you get teachings here and there and not understanding how everything fits together. So when we think about the Lam Rim, that's kind of in general, there are these three layers or levels of spiritual motivation. And then there's kind of more specifically the three principal aspects: renunciation, bodhicitta, and wisdom. And so there's this analogy that if the Dharma teachings are like an ocean, the three principal aspects are like the treasure found in its depths. And then Atisha's Lam Rim is like a ship that gathers this treasure, and the spiritual master is the captain of that vessel. So I think that helps us to put in perspective that how important these three, why Lama Tsongkhapa wrote the three principal aspects of the path. Because there are so many teachings, but we need to, like Venerable Children has always told me, in your practice, always be keeping those three in mind. Don't go to one of them exclusively. Always have all three in your practice. And that's been helpful for me to know how to practice, so I don't get unbalanced. So then, what are the three levels of spiritual practitioners? Atisha, who set this out, he said it this way. Of course, this is Alex Burson translating, so his words are always very interesting. So for the first level, anyone who works fervently by some means for merely the happiness to be found in uncontrollably reoccurring situations of future lives, like the way he writes, is known as someone of minimal spiritual motivation. So this is basically someone who is thinking about their next life and they want to have a good rebirth. And the way Lama Tsongkhapa said it more is that the person of this special small capacity, they don't work so much on behalf of things for this lifetime, but they're striving for the next lifetime to have human or divine rebirth. So, yeah. So pretty much your focus is on the next life, which is actually more than most of what I have most of each day. I'm fairly focused on this life. So even getting to that level of motivation is an accomplishment. And then the second level is, so the first one we call the initial level, and the second one is, there's different words I use, I want to keep them consistent, is the middle level. And that is someone who's turned their back on the pleasures of compulsive existence, the way he words this, with the nature turned from negativities and works fervently for their own serenity. So here's a person who was trying to get to liberation or nirvana, trying to be free of cyclic existence. Turning their back on the pleasures of compulsive existence. That's known as cyclic existence. And then the third level is anyone who fully wishes to eliminate completely all the problems of others as well as the problems of their own mind stream. So this is full enlightenment. So what Venerable wanted us to kind of talk about here is what are the causes, and then what have you attained? How do you know you've attained these levels, these various aspects of the path? And so we'll start with the first one, the path in common with the initial level practitioners. So we say the path in common, because what we're doing is we're setting our motivation for full enlightenment. But in order to get to that say you were taking a train from here to New York, you have to go through all these places on the way there, and it's just the same. We have to do all the practices in common with the initial level practitioner, and then all the practices in common with the middle level practitioners, so that we can then do the practices of the highest level. And so we have the motive, as a Mahayana practitioner, we have this motivation for full enlightenment, but then we have to practice where we're at. And so we use the expression, the path in common with. So we know that we're going farther, but here's where we're at now. So their aspiration that they're trying to develop in that initial level is to die peacefully and have a good rebirth. And this is some of this that are here. This will be on your sheet, some of these things. So how do we do that? What do you meditate on in order to develop that aspiration? Precious human life, impermanence and death, and the unfortunate realms of rebirth. Those are the three things that will help us to develop this aspiration. And then, so I'm going to review the main points first and then talk about them. So the other thing is then, once you've developed that aspiration, then what do you practice? And so in this, for the first level of practitioner, it's refuge and karma and its effects. And so we'll go into each of these and explain how that works. So, okay, so the first level, the initial level, they want to generate an aspiration for a good rebirth. And then once they've done that, then they're going to follow, their refuge and understand karma, the ethical dimension of their actions, so that they can actually actualize that aspiration to have a good rebirth. So it's not enough just to do the first step of generating the aspiration. Once you've generated the aspiration, now you've got to do something. Just like in the second, or say in the third one, if you generate the aspiration to free all sentient beings by becoming enlightened, and you generate that aspiration, well then still you've got to do the work of, of doing that. So that will become clearer as to what you do. But that's kind of how this outline is set up. So in the three principal aspects of the path, it's this part about, by contemplating the freedoms and fortunes so difficult to find in the fleeting nature of your life, reverse the clinging to this life. So that's bringing up these topics of precious human life and thinking about impermanence and death. So when we do that, when we just start with those two topics alone, we'll begin to change our behaviors and our attitudes. And so, when Venerable talked about describing the level of attainment, this one wasn't so clearly spelled out. But I think from my reading, what I would say is, if you've actually generated that aspiration and attained that, I think this would definitely be the case, that you would have a more, firmer understanding that would actually change your behaviors and change your attitudes. I think you could say that would be an attainment. And then you'll get along with people better. You'll die happier. That's the attainment. So you've created the causes for a peaceful death and a good rebirth. So then what do we meditate on when we meditate on the precious human life to reach that aspiration and that level of attainment? So the precious human life really is helping us to see the situation that we have, and it deepens as we continue and integrate the various parts of the path. But basically it allows us to make good use of our time and take the essence of this life and understand what our potentials are. And so in order to do that, we need to realize how rare this situation is. And really, when they describe the kind of cosmology, I guess you would say, in Buddhism, they talk about times where Buddhas aren't there and times where Buddhas are there, and it's rare for Buddhas to be there, to be around. And why is that? Well, what they say is that they only come when, they don't come when no one's going to listen, is what it boils down to. And so there's times where world systems are evolving, apparently, that things are just kind of getting better and better, and people are like, have no interest. So the Buddhas wouldn't show up because there's no interest. So it's really on our side to have an interest, which is why they say the human realm is the best, because we have like the right mix of suffering and, you know, happiness to kind of keep us going. We're not so miserable that we can't practice, but we're not so happy that we don't think we need to. Kind of goes like that. So, and then we need to, you know, see that there's some need and that this practice will, you know, get us someplace, and that we have the ability to engage in it. If we don't have any level of confidence, why would we make any effort? So we have to make sure that we have the internal and external conditions. And so one thing to consider, you know, for those of us who have read a lot about the precious human life, is that there's no difference between our precious human life and that of Milarepa. I don't usually think that way. But, you know, it's actually the case. We have a precious human life. And then we have to think about making use of it in this lifetime, right now. Because we never know what's going to come first. Tomorrow's practice or our death today. Which is why once we understand the value of our precious human life, we want to think about impermanence and death, because this helps us to really get our perspective much more in line with towards practice. In fact, this is how Shakyamuni Buddha, you know, in his life story, he observed sickness, birth, aging, sickness, and death, right? Old age and death, and that's what propelled him. And the same thing with Milarepa. He had fear of death. Essentially, he had done all this black magic and killed 30-some people, and these things happen, and he actually became quite fearful of death, and that's what propelled him. And it was the same thing with Gampopa. So for, you know, and you can just think in your own experience, people that you know when they're facing death more imminently than we are, you know, putting in our minds right now, how the mind naturally turns towards thinking about what's next and then making preparations for that. I mean, it's just natural, and we don't need to wait. We don't want to wait till you're in that situation. You want to be preparing. That's the whole thing, is think about preparing for the future. You don't prepare for a trip that you're not going to take. If you think you're going someplace, you prepare. And so that's what it's all about. And then the next topic has to do with contemplating the possibility that when we die, we might not go to such a great place. And this is one that we usually don't hear much about in the Western Buddhist teachings, actually. They tend to shy away from teaching about the lower realms very much, for a lot of reasons. And I would just recommend that people look up in Geshe Nalung Darge's book, An Anthology of Well-Spoken Advice, read about this section. For me, this was so important because everything he described in there was my experience. And I very much almost walked away from Buddhism when I first met it because of hearing about the lower realms. And I'm just so lucky that I didn't turn away, and it's a problem for many people. And there's not enough time to go into it to the depth that it requires, and it's very well laid out in there. It was my experience completely of thinking these things are irrelevant, and he just lays out for you quite clearly how kind of you're being self-centered, you're being closed-minded, and all the ways that I was thinking wrong about this. And I think it's very important for us to look at that, because we want to do those meditations, basically, so that we can generate the attainments, you know. And if we don't put ourselves in those situations, I'm not so sure it will work. It seems quite clear that if you spend the time doing these meditations, that it's going to have a very beneficial effect on your mind. Because even if you think of the lower realms just as a phenomena in the human realm alone, and you see people who have hellish lives and people who are addicted to this and that, and you see the animal realm and you see people who are lost in pleasure, and you just put yourselves in those situations alone and see what would you be doing with your time and what would you be doing with your life and where do these things lead. It's quite powerful, and so this is what we want to think about. So it's quite a disadvantage to throw away those teachings, I think. I think what's better is for us to try to find a way to bring them into our understanding in a way that we can work with in a positive way. So this helps us to be aware then, by considering all the various kind of problems that we could have, all the problems that exist, to develop this determination to be free of them. So we need to be willing to look, not just at some of them, but all of them, so that we can just look at, want to develop this renunciation. And so that's why the Buddha taught this. He wasn't trying to, it was out of compassion that the Buddha taught these meditations. And really, one thing that I think is helpful to understand is the Buddha said, his words would be better than mine, how I try to contextualize these things is really is what Venerable Children says. These realms are as real as any other appearances to the mind. You know, so you can think of it that way. And another thing that I found powerful in reading about this particular topic is Geshe Nawang Darwe. Now I know why Venerable says classic Geshe Nawang Darwe. He's just so straightforward. He says, it's not difficult to tell beforehand in which direction our next rebirth will be. Most of us spend all of our time building up negative, destructive potentials, and these lead only to a disastrous future. Just look at today. How many times since we have woken up have we become angry, thought ill of others, criticized, or been negative? And how often have we done anything positive, constructive, or beneficial for others? So, you know, it's not a thing, it's just a thing of looking plainly at our lives and not running away, just being completely honest. Like Geshe Pelge always says, just close yourself behind your door and at least there be completely honest with yourself, you know. And I think that's very important to do. So the Buddha said that, and this is the perspective I take on these different realms, that all fears and boundless problems originate, in fact, from the mind. There's nothing to fear other than my mind. So all of these things are the products of a negative mind. That's what the Buddha has said. So how real are those? Probably as real as anything, any other appearances. So, okay. So then, those are the meditations that we do to help us to generate the aspiration to have a good rebirth and a peaceful death. And then once we've developed that aspiration, then we need to kind of turn towards how to enact it. And it starts with refuge. And so this is, you know, we've got the concern and everything now, but we need some guides, essentially. You know, like Lama Tsongkhapa said, you know, we may be very intelligent, but you need, even intelligent people need this kind of guidance, and that's very clear from my life. You know, without the teachings and the guidance, I wouldn't be very far along anywhere. And it's just like anything else we learn, it's not so different. I mean, who learns to do any skill without a lot of education and training? So in one sense, you can say that taking refuge is how we open the door to the Buddha's teachings. And renunciation is how we open the door for entering the paths. And then they say bodhicitta is the door to the Mahayana. So we're kind of here on this part of taking refuge, and that's where we want to have this wisdom fear. Like Dignaga said, adrift in the bottomless ocean of cyclic existence, devoured by the fierce sea monsters of attachment and the like, to whom should I go for refuge today? So when you see your mind, who can help you with that? You know, that's the question that leads me to where is, you know, I want to have that wisdom fear of how am I going to deal with this crazy mind, you know. And so we need, when things are, you know, as I said in the motivation, when things are more than we can handle ourselves, we need a guide. Just like when it's raining, you need the protection of a roof. When it's cold, you need the protection of clothing. It's no different from that. So we want to have that sense of alarm, that wisdom, fear. That's one of the causes of refuge. But then it's not that alone. We have to have some kind of conviction or faith. So we have to know that there is a, well, basically we have to realize what I would say is the Buddhist worldview in terms of knowing what are the causes of our problems, these different afflictions that we have, rather than looking outward, you know, thinking that the problem is outside of ourselves. So it's our own internal enemies that we want to be liberated from, and for that you need not a temporary kind of refuge, because they don't go away. You can't move away from your mind. You take it with you wherever you go. So, and His Holiness has said that when you develop conviction in these paths and states that make liberation a reality, you will see that taking refuge in the Buddha and his doctrine and the spiritual community is a true possibility. So this is something that deepens, you know. We have to really understand the qualities of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and then develop conviction. And so by going through these teachings in this way, I found this kind of helpful, because it just made me go through the whole thing in a short period of time. So Venerable Chodron has said that that in order to take refuge properly, we have to, you know, we need to understand the three jewels. But in order to do that, you have to understand the Four Noble Truths. In order to understand that, you have to understand the two truths. So this whole thing is, you know, it comes down to that really, even to take refuge, we have to have some understanding of reality, or the refuge won't, it will just be like mere words, because it won't have the depth, I think, that we need to deal with our mind, to deal with these internal enemies. So as we gain these convictions, and mainly that we understand that the mind is pure and luminous, we understand that afflictions are like just adventitious and that the root of them is ignorance, and then we learn that there's antidotes for these. That's what we're trying to gain conviction in. Not that the Buddha is a great guy who's going to take away all our problems. You know, it's not like worship. Even though it may look like that to people who don't understand Buddhism, when they see us doing prostrations or this and that, it just looks like, you know, wow, what are they doing? That's not what it's about. So we go for refuge, and then we also need to understand karma. So basically, you know, the first thing the Buddha said is stop harming ourselves and others. That's the first advice. And Geshe Sopa has said that basically, once you've taken refuge, which kind of helps you to enter the teachings, then you need to examine causality from your own experience until you're convinced that wholesome actions result in happiness and non-virtue leads to unhappiness. This faith and conviction that we develop in that is really a very strong basis for our Dharma practice. And without that, we can't really make much headway, because it's not easy to change. You can't just say, oh, I don't want to be angry today. It doesn't work that way. We have to come at this from so many different directions, and it takes a lot of effort physically and mentally to do this. So he says, if you don't have confidence in the truth and benefit of the practice, you'll not be able to change your attitude and behavior. This is why conviction and karmic causality is the root of all happiness, from worldly joy up to the bliss of supramundane happiness, liberation, and enlightenment. So this is how karma fits in. It's huge in our understanding of how things work. So that takes us through the initial scope, and then we go to the level in common with the middle level practitioners. And here, the aspiration that we're trying to develop is this determination to be free from cyclic existence and to attain liberation. So renunciation, this is kind of what we're going for. And how do we develop that aspiration? By studying and having some realizations regarding the Four Noble Truth, the disadvantages of cyclic existence, the nature of afflictions, and then the factors that stimulate the arising of afflictions. So this is all in the outline, and not hard to come by. All of our Lam Rims have these all laid out. So once you've meditated and developed that aspiration, then after that, what you want to do to actualize it is the 3 higher trainings of ethics, concentration, and wisdom. So now we'll go back and talk about these a little bit more. So this middle level practitioner, what they've kind of seen is that even though, you can look for the future lives and that's nice and everything, but actually the whole system is a mess. They want out. They want out of cyclic existence altogether. And so they contemplate the disadvantages and the sufferings in order to generate that. And so Lama Tsongkhapa says, "For you embodied beings bound by the craving for existence without the pure determination to be free," or this renunciation, "from the ocean of cyclic existence, there is no way for you to pacify the attractions to its pleasurable effects. Thus, from the outset, seek to generate the determination to be free. By contemplating the leisure and endowment so difficult to find," that's our precious human life, "and the fleeting nature of your life, reverse the clinging to this life," which we went over. By repeatedly contemplating the infallible effects of karma and the miseries of cyclic existence, reverse the clinging to future lives. So you see there that, the infallible effects of karma, that your actions, they don't, the results, there definitely will be results, but you can attenuate those results by purification in your practice. And so, since there are definitely going to be results from our actions, since they have an ethical dimension, and then in cyclic existence, there's always the situation of dukkha. I mean, it's the nature of the beast. We will never be satisfied in this. Because why? Because we have a body and mind that are under the influence of afflictions and karma. And so we're embodied beings bound by the craving for existence. And that's what that is pointing to. And so then describing what would the attainment be like for renunciation, Lama Tsongkhapa said, "By contemplating in this way, do not generate even for an instant the wish for the pleasures of cyclic existence. When you have day and night unceasingly the mind aspiring for liberation, you have generated the determination to be free." And this is not a small realization. This is huge, and it gives incredible focus and energy to your practice. And you won't be distracted. The 8 worldly concerns will become much smaller when we have this going for us, because we're so clear about what we're trying to do with our lives. And so we will spend our energy that way instead of trying to tweak our samsaric existence. And so I can't wait to have that. Tweaking is not going so well. Okay, so then, let's see if I'm getting lost here. Okay, so then to develop this aspiration, we want to meditate on the Four Noble Truths. And basically the perspective there is how Maitreya said it. Just as you recognize that you are ill and see that you can eliminate the cause of illness by attaining health, by relying on a remedy, so recognize suffering, eliminate its cause, attain cessation, and rely on the path. So basically, the Four Noble Truths lay out the problem and the solution, essentially. And the problem, when you get down to it, is the karma and afflictions. And so Nagarjuna said that through the cessation of karma and afflictions, there's nirvana. Karma and afflictions come from conceptualization. These come from elaboration, and elaboration cease in emptiness, or by emptiness. And so that's basically, you know, these kind of karma and afflictions that we have, these that arise from conceptualizations. What are those conceptualizations? The one that we are so familiar with from Venerable's teachings are these 4 distortions. Just the way we're seeing things all the time. Permanent, things that are impermanent we see as permanent all the time. We're doing that. Things that don't have the nature of a self we see as having the nature of a self. There's me, I'm here talking right now. I am here. And then the seeing things that are not so gorgeous as beautiful, like, what's the other one? Oh yeah, seeing things that are in the nature of dukkha as happiness, just like all of our temporary pleasures that always never bring satisfaction. The longer we do any of them, they all lead to misery. Just start eating ice cream and don't stop. Tell me how happy you are. So that's that, you know. And that's our problem, is these false conceptions. Okay, so that's the Four Noble Truths. And then as they go into that and they look at the disadvantages of cyclic existence, then I think of this usually as the endless desires, the endless activities, and the endless birth and rebirth that happen, death and rebirth that happens in cyclic existence. It's kind of like that third suffering that we're conditioned. So, you know, animals don't want to have pain and they want freedom from it, and non-Buddhists understand that pleasures can turn into pain, but the third one of this conditioned, all-pervasive conditioned suffering, dukkha, that's just seeing how our body and mind is under the control of our past actions, our karma, and our afflictions. And it's one in nature with those. It's the basic condition for creating all kinds of suffering. And so we have to transcend that. And understand it. It's not like it's going to go away. It's not like you can tweak samsara and fix it. You need to want to get out. And then you need to understand the nature of the afflictions and how they arise. And so that's a mental affliction. What is that? It's a phenomena that when it arises is disturbing in character. And that through arising it disturbs the mind stream. That's what Asanga said. So this is basically these unsatisfactory experiences that we have. The causes of them are our afflictions. And so in the teachings they often talk about 6 main ones: attachment, anger, pride, ignorance, deluded doubt, and distorted views. But what causes these to arise? And then I'm going to go through this mostly as a list. The latencies of those afflictions, like we've kind of planted seeds. I always think of that as like we've created the habit, like that result of karma, you know. We're creatures of habit. You tend to do things that you've done before. And then contact is what also stimulates arising of afflictions. Detrimental influences, like bad friends, you know. Not that they are bad, but we aren't so great when we're around certain kinds of people because we maybe can't control ourselves. And then various verbal kind of stimulation around us, like TV and media and things. And then habitual ways of thinking and emotional habits. And then inappropriate attention, which is paying attention to negative aspects of situations. So painful and such a habit. And then having biases, you know, looking in your mind and seeing your biases, and then being quick to jump to conclusions or being judgmental, that's all under inappropriate attention. So, I mean, this is why for me, I think of in the 37 practices where they say, in brief, whatever you're doing, ask yourself, what's the state of my mind? With constant mindfulness and mental alertness, accomplish others' good. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. With that, you know, with the introspective alertness and mindfulness, we can just stop and try to find out what's happening here in this mind. Which of these afflictions are going on and why are they arising? So it's not like we're without tools. But that's the way that we need to spend time with these things to develop this aspiration. Okay, so now we've got it. We've got this renunciation. Now what do we do? So now we need to practice the 3 higher trainings, because now that you've got this, you're not out, right? You're still stuck in samsara. So Nagarjuna said, through ethical conduct, concentration, and wisdom, achieve nirvana, an undefiled state of peace and restraint, ageless, deathless, inexhaustible, free from earth, water, fire, wind, sun, and moon. And so, as we all know, you need to have ethical conduct in order to be able to concentrate. You need to be able to concentrate in order to be able to develop the wisdom and the correct view. So, So where does this correct view lead to us? That's where I think I'd like to spend the time on this section. We've talked a little bit about the afflictions, but the root of all this is our ignorance. And this is something that in order to be free of, we need to generate the correct view, this wisdom that realizes the lack of inherent existence, or the direct realization of selflessness. This is the antidote. This is what cuts it. So why do we meditate on the correct view? This is, Lama Tsongkhapa said, even if you have developed the determination to be free and the altruistic intention, without the wisdom realizing the final nature of how things actually exist, you cannot cut the root of cyclic existence. Therefore, strive for the means to realize dependent arising. And then he went on in the next verse, and this is in the 3 principal aspects of the path I'm reading now. And he said, well, what is the correct view? So one who sees the infallible effects of cause and effect of all phenomena in cyclic existence and beyond, and destroys all false perceptions of their inherent existence, has entered the path which pleases the Buddha. So basically, the correct view is this realization of the inherent existence of self and all phenomena. Lack of inherent existence. Thank you. Yeah. And then how do we know when we've attained this? That's the next thing that Venerable wanted us to make sure when do we know we've attained this? Well, that's the next verse, in part. When your analysis of the correct view is incomplete, he said, appearances are infallible, dependent arising. Emptiness is free of assertions of inherent existence or non-existence. As long as these two understandings are seen as separate, one has not yet realized the intent of the Buddha. So there you haven't really put 2 and 2 together yet. You haven't seen that emptiness and dependent arising are completely compatible. And that's actually the way, in my mind, that you can know that you're not there. You know, because people have a lot of experiences that they don't understand. And then, and I'll explain this in a different way, but I just want to do it this way first because she wanted us to focus on the 3 principles. So when the analysis of the correct view is complete, then it's the next verse. When these 2 realizations are seen as simultaneous and concurrent, from the mere sight of infallible dependent arising comes definite knowledge which completely destroys all modes of mental grasping. At that time, the analysis of the profound view is complete. So I can't understand this just from those verses. The next verse explains the prasangika view. But let's go for an easier route. So basically, when you've attained full awakening, full enlightenment, let's go that route first. Well, no, that's not so good. Okay, let's say you've attained liberation. you've realized emptiness. At that point you would see everything is like an illusion. So when you've realized the lack of inherent existence within yourself, and you understand it for the very first time, when you rise from that experience, what you're going to experience is appearances are like illusions. They won't hold the solidity and the solidness that they had before. It's just in the same, so the appearances and the reality are not like, there's a gap, I guess is one way to think of it. So just like physicists distinguish between what appears and what actually exists, you need to recognize that there's a discrepancy between what appears and the actual fact. And so that's the thing with the two truths, that there's the conventional nature of reality, kind of what appears and functions, and then there's the ultimate nature of reality, this lack of inherent existence. And then at full enlightenment, you're going to realize, you'll simultaneously realize all knowables. So this is free not only from these various counterproductive emotions that we have that drive cyclic existence. You're not only free from that, but you're also free from the dispositions to those afflictive emotions. And these are latent forces in the mind. So until you've gotten rid of those, you always have this kind of going back and forth, like when you're having direct perception of the emptiness of inherent existence, there are no appearances to the mind. But when you arise from that, the appearances are there, but you know, you have this other realization that, yo, this isn't the way they really exist. So you're always going back and forth. But when you reach full enlightenment, then those, you don't have to keep flipping back and forth. You're actually able to hold those both in the one moment of consciousness, which is only at full enlightenment or Buddhahood can you do that. And that whole thing clears away the obscurations that keep you from having an omniscient mind. So that's, does that make any sense? Mm-hmm. Some. Okay.
The mind, I was still thinking of what you said first, before that.
Well, we don't have a lot of time, but I think this is worth doing. Just maybe I'll mention this. In Geshe Nawang Darge's book, he describes these, and he lays it out in about 6 or 7 pages, and it's so much easier to understand, I think, in a lot of ways. It kind of, because it goes through enough steps that you kind of can see what's falling away at the different levels. And this is what we're going to be learning in the next weeks. This is like the topic of paths and grounds and paths. And when they lay it out, it's like, wow, that makes so much sense. And so I think it's, you know, worth kind of looking and reading that. He explains what happens on the 5 paths. And he does it for the 3, you know, for the hearers, the solitary realizers, and the bodhisattvas. And I just found it much easier to understand. These others are just kind of like words a lot of times, and then you have to know the meaning of the words. Well, he uses all these, his translations are different, so I just had to think about everything differently. And it's quite descriptive in a short place, so I would recommend that.
What's his name again?
Geshe Nawang Darge. It's the book called Anthology of Well-Spoken Advice. So basically it comes down to this: when so this switching back and forth that's happening, that eventually they get to the point where that doesn't really happen anymore. And so at that point they can simultaneously be aware of the actual appearance of everything that exists. And so all the limitations to being omniscient are like gone. And what I like about this actually is one thing they said here that, see if I can say this in my own words. When you have this view, just not even full awakening, but like this, the path of seeing where you've reached a direct understanding of emptiness, and then you're able to see things like illusions, like what Venerable explained earlier in here, how that works in your day. Even if, like His Holiness said in this book, Becoming Enlightened, he said, I haven't realized emptiness and I haven't realized bodhicitta fully, but just my understanding of them helps me so much, because like you're not reactive to everything. You just won't be reactive to everything, because it's like you see that it's like an illusion. You're not like, this appearance isn't so solid, so you don't have this enemy in front of you. You know, it just, you don't have those reactions at all. And so think about having a mind that's like that, that doesn't have all this reactivity. And so then what he says here is, this acts as a great spur to their far-reaching attitude of giving, and consequently their practice of generosity becomes extremely broad. And that makes just such sense to me, how wisdom would support generosity, because you'd be seeing everything so differently, and just how wonderful that would be. I think it's incredible to think about. I hope that makes some sense. Okay, now the third level, so we don't have much time. So now we're on to the advanced level practitioner, which is the altruistic intention. And so this is very well laid out. You know, in order to develop this, Venerable has taught on this many times, we need to have equanimity, and then we need to either do the 7-point cause and effect instructions or do the equalizing and exchanging self for other. Those are meditations that are all laid out very succinctly as to, but you know, you need to do, that help you to generate this altruistic intention, which has 2 parts. And in order to, so once you've generated that mind of bodhicitta, then what do you do? Well, then you want to do the 6 far-reaching practices, and incorporated in those are the 4 ways of gathering disciples and the path of Tantra. So that's kind of basically what the outline says we need to do, and it makes sense. So let's go back and look at it just a little bit. So we've got to this place where we've understood suffering, and actually, you know, we've seen that this is like an illusion even, and that people are suffering needlessly, as Guy Newland always says, this unnecessary suffering. And I mean, that would have to help to generate compassion, I think, to see how unnecessarily people are suffering. So Lama Tsongkhapa says, swept by the current of the 4 powerful rivers, tied by the strong bonds of karma, which are so hard to undo, caught in the iron net of self-grasping egoism, completely enveloped by the darkness of ignorance, born and reborn in boundless cyclic existence, unceasingly tormented by the 3 sufferings, by thinking of all mother sentient beings in this condition, generate the supreme altruistic intention. So this is this motivation that's twofold. It's both to free others from suffering and to become enlightened in order to do that. Because that's the most effective way. And it's considered the seed of all the Buddha's good qualities, this altruistic intention. And so how do you know when you've realized that? What is the description of, you know, the attainment? One is that it's spontaneous, but the other, what His Holiness said, is when this double aspiration, you know, to help others and to become enlightened, in order to do that, it becomes as strong outside of meditation as it is inside of meditation, is what he says. Then you've generated the altruistic intention to become enlightened, and in that moment you've become a bodhisattva. And so then the various practices of starting with equanimity. So what's that? That's an evenness of mind, impartial but not indifferent, which is quite an important point, because the near enemy of equanimity is indifference. So you can be kind of indifferent about something and think you're being equanimous. But equanimity more has a sense of caring and concern, whereas indifference, you're just like kind of checked out a little bit. So we start with equanimity, where we have this impartiality, free of attachment, anger, apathy. That's the immeasurable equanimity in the four immeasurables. And then because, you know, when you think about it, because the pollutants in the mind are not one in nature with the mind, the good qualities exist innately, Maitreya says. And Dharmakirti says a similar thing. The nature of the mind is clear light. The pollutants are adventitious. So I think that's, for me, important to remember here, that we can develop this equanimity, and all these things that are getting in the way can get tossed out with effort and proper antidotes. So then we follow along either the 7-point instruction, cause and effect instructions, or the equalizing self and others. Okay, we're getting there. One thing that when they talked about what to practice once you've developed that aspiration, that I liked, it was something that kind of how Venerable Children says there's never a day off in samsara. There's another one. We can't take a holiday from love and compassion in order to enjoy the pleasures of being self-centered, which isn't pleasurable anyway, but it's just this idea that one of the great sages says, cultivate this compassion towards all beings at all times, whether you're in meditative concentration or in the course of any other activity. And so basically, when we think about the 6 perfections, generosity, ethical conduct, fortitude, joyous effort, concentration, and wisdom, what underlies all of those is compassion. And what do these do for us? These help to ripen our own minds. And so as we progress along the path, we may have the altruistic intention, we may have the aspiration there, but now we need to cultivate it through these practices. And then the next one that's listed is the, oh yeah, I want to say this first, because I think this is an interesting translation. So Venerable Children says that these 6 practices become far-reaching when they're motivated and held by the altruistic intention. They are purified and realized when they're held by the wisdom realizing the emptiness of the agent, the object, and the action. So this thing about purified and realized, one of Alex Berzin's translations, he doesn't ever say the Buddha when you read this whole book. It's always the fully evolved one, the clear one. And there's one that's like, one that has the connotation of like, he doesn't really say Buddhahood either. It's something like fully purified. And you know, we think we're doing purification practices every day here. And just think of that, you're fully purified, and boom, there you are. You're the Buddha. I like that. So once we've done the 6 perfections, then we have to think about the 4 ways of gathering disciples, and these are sometimes included in the 6 perfections. They are. And what are those? There are things that we do in order to ripen others' minds. So we have to train in the 4 ways of gathering disciples, which are in generosity and teaching them the Dharma, encouraging them to practice, and then embodying the Dharma in our own, modeling it in our own life. And then after that comes the path of Tantra. So the sutra path is what the Buddha taught while he appeared in the aspect of a monastic. And this is like the path of the hearers and the solitary realizers and the bodhisattvas. And then the path of Tantra is what he taught when he appeared as Rajadhara. And so they have their own practices and paths for that. And now we are enlightened. Does anyone have any questions or comments? That was a whirlwind. Sorry, I wanted to get into some things more, but there wasn't really time. I'd love to share with people the writings about the I typed up parts from both the here, when they go through the paths, and then the Bodhisattva. And I don't know, for me it's just so inspiring. I'll read them to the community if you want to hear them tomorrow. Anyone have any questions or anything?
Just a clarification. Equalizing and exchanging, is that what we call Tonglen?
It ends in that, but I'll give you the steps are on this one sheet that you have in front of you. Mm-hmm. Starts with the others. It starts with a kind of equanimity. Its instruction is a little bit different, and it's a different kind of equanimity in a sense, because it's not like everyone's on an equal playing field in a sense. You aren't separating yourself out from the picture so much. But then, so it's got these 6 steps of equalizing self and others, looking at the disadvantages of self-centeredness, so we know we want to toss this culprit out, these kind of thoughts out, and then looking at the benefits of cherishing others, then exchanging self and others, then doing the taking and giving, which is what you're referring to, the Tonglen, and then those are what lead to the bodhicitta. So they're actually on your sheet there. And we have just tons of teachings on those, of course. Okay. So maybe we can make a dedication that we all always meet meet qualified Mahayana and Vajrayana teachers that can teach us this in depth and won't give up on us when we're hard-headed, when we're whatever we are, with our innate and our ideological, I like Alex's words. He doesn't use the word innate, but he uses for the ones acquired. He's our ideological obscurations. And may we recognize them and always have a series of precious human rebirths with all of our wonderful teachers. And may we do this so that we can help everyone that we meet, and may we have huge amount of karmic connections that we need in order to have a relationship with many, many, many beings that will lead them to enlightenment.